This conference will now be recorded.
Good. Okay. Welcome to the June 10th South Whitehall Township. This is a joint meeting between the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission. As you just heard, the meeting will be recorded. And the intent is really to provide a status update of progress made on the comprehensive plan to this point. We would ask you if you are accessing the meeting from your computer and electronically, and you desire to make a comment, please type it into the chat box with your full name and address. I'll be monitoring that chat box throughout the course of the discussion, and I will bring those questions to the floor at the appropriate time after the presentations are made and just before courtesy of the floor. After the chat box comments are considered, we will allot some time for those who are accessing the meeting by phone only. Again, we would ask the speaker to unmute their phone and identify their name and address prior to making a comment. And as always, if you're not speaking, we would ask you to kindly mute your microphone to avoid background noise that makes interference in the meeting and make it difficult for others to hear. So with those general guidelines, I'll turn it back over to the commission chair.
Thank you, George. So yes, it's an exciting night. We'll get a little update of our comprehensive plan as we stand so far. So I'm going to officially call the meeting to order. So Renee and/or George, could we have a roll call vote first, please?
Sure. I'm going to start with the Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Walk. Can you hear me?
Mike Walk? I'm sure he's here. I saw him.
I see him. Are you on mute, Mike?
Microphone's mute.
I think he's muted. Oh, no, it doesn't look like it. Mike, can you hear us?
Okay, okay, great. He gave a thumbs up. All right. Go ahead, Renee.
Commissioner Mobilio?
Here.
Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Commissioner Seton?
Here.
And Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Okay. I'm going to jump over to the Planning Commission members. David Dunbar?
Here.
David Wilson?
Here.
Diane Kelly?
Here.
Brian Height?
Here.
Hold on. Oh, Bill McNair. Sorry. Did
I'm
I
here.
get?
Dave Dunbar.
I did. Okay, I think I have everybody. Did I miss anybody on planning?
Alto.
Oh,
Hey.
Al Tope, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm here.
And
All
Vinnie
right,
Quinn.
I think we have Vinnie Quinn is absent.
Yes.
That's correct. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Let's start off our meeting this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would please indulge me. Please rise. I pledge allegiance
New flag.
to the flag of the United States of America
The
and
Republic.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to note that all public sessions of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners are electronically recorded. The electronic record is kept until the minutes of the meeting are approved and destroyed if a request is not made to retain the electronic version at that time. As George had mentioned, the focus of the meeting this evening is a joint meeting between the BOC and the Planning Board, and to talk more about the status of the comprehensive plan. But prior to that, we do have some business to take care of. And under informational and discussion items, we have the consideration of Township Response Letter to PennDOT regarding Transportation Improvement Plan update. So, Bill, would you like to present on this one this evening?
Okay. This is a letter to the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission and the PennDOT. Comments on the TIP plan. And I just went through and noted the projects that are in our area and asked that we be have the opportunity to comment with the LVPC and PennDOT when these come up. I also mentioned 2 other projects that were on the TIP plan but got removed: the 309 betterment north of 22 and the covered bridge on Lap Road. That was written, it's been reviewed, it was signed and sent into Planning Commission, Lehigh Valley Planning Commission and PennDOT. We already got an email back from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission that they've accepted it, and they will be sure to include us in their work as they plan through projects in our area. And the purpose of sending that in was just so we have a placeholder that we have made comments on the regulations. So as these rules come up, as these projects come up, we do get the opportunity to see what's going on. There are times when a small change in the design could have a big change for somebody locally. So I think it's also good just to get in with it as the projects are being planned, so we get an opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Bill. And I think if everybody remembers, this is the topic Bill presented on at our last meeting during courtesy of the floor to bring to our attention. There were some timing issues. Obviously, there was a quick turnaround on this letter. So thank you, Bill, for your work on this. Much appreciated. Are there any questions from either of the boards, planning and or Board of Commissioners? Hearing none, are there any questions from the public? Okay, thank you, Bill. Much appreciated. I don't believe we need any motions or anything like that. We've already made a motion on it at a previous meeting. It was just for information and discussion. And thank you again for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next this evening, we have our comprehensive plan update. It is broken down into 3 presentations. And the first presentation is the phase 2 results. And our very own Dave Manhart is here this evening to present on this particular topic. Dave, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Dave, I think I need to get out of this, right? So that you can have the screen. Oh, you got it. Okay, good.
Dave, you're on mute, just so you know.
Thank you. That would help.
There you go. Yeah.
All right.
Now we can't see your wonderful face, though. You took your video off. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not.
I kind of did.
It's okay. Oh.
So we have the results from the phase 2, which was our Where Should We Grow outreach. And we went through the data and compiled all the maps. And we have those results for you tonight. And so I'm going to go through and kind of present how we came up with with the maps, the results of where people decided growth should go, and the areas to protect and improve. And then later we have Scott Peklerski is going to talk about some traffic analysis that he's done or beginning as part of this phase. And then we also have Todd Poole from Forward Planning to talk about comprehensive plans as they relate to the COVID-19 pandemic, things to consider moving forward. So with that, I'll kind of start. Not advancing. There we go. Just a recap of the process. We had phase 1, which was existing conditions, guiding principles. Those were the events that we held at the high school. The second phase was, we called it Where Should We Grow? This is where we had the map exercises. And we're right now beginning a phase 3 where we're kind of analyzing those results. And I'll get into some of the next steps as I wrap up. Here's the guiding principles, just a refresher. I think we'll be using these kind of as we break into subcommittees, as you know, if anybody has any issues or questions, we can always go back to these. So the phase 2, Where Should We Grow exercises, we had roughly 90 participants. There were 4 public stakeholder meetings, and those were held primarily at different schools. We tried to use different schools at different sections of the town, trying to get as many different people as possible. We also held 2 focus group meetings, one at Muhlenberg College and one at the Greenewald UCC Church. We had a few others planned, but with the pandemic, we kind of thought group meetings were not a good idea. So we put those on hold and decided to go with what we had. We also had the joint BOC PC meeting, where the last time we were together. So all told, we had 26 maps that we included in the analysis. So if you remember, when we were going through the exercise, each group was given 2 stickers for areas that they want to protect and 2 stickers for areas they want to improve. So what we did, because we were only using 2 stickers, we just took a sum of all the stickers in each hex to get an idea of areas that people feel are important to protect or to improve. So I have a map of the township broken up into that hexagon grid. You can kind of see the roads, they're pretty faint, but we have the west is the easiest one to see is the Northeast Extension. And then as you move east, Cedar Crest Boulevard. And there's the black lines are waterways, and the light gray are the roadways. So here's all of the protection stickers that were placed on the maps. So you see they primarily are in the north of Huckleberry, kind of along the Jordan Valley. So as we move forward, these are areas that we have to consider for protection. One caveat with the, yeah.
Hey, is there just for the sake of the public, just for like maybe for points of reference, like can you point on, oh perfect, like can you point like where Cedar Crest Boulevard, yep, your cursor's working. It just kind of would be helpful to know,
yep.
like
So Cedar Crest Boulevard.
Awesome, okay.
And then Northeast Extension, 309 over here, 22.
Okay.
And what are the locations with the most marks also?
So that would be this hexagon. That would be, so Cedar Crest and Huckleberry. So just basically the downhill side of Huckleberry. And basically, you know, everything downhill from the Huckleberry Ridge is where the most protection dots were placed. Then we also asked people to place stickers where they felt there was improvement needed. And as you can see, one thing we kind of noticed as we were going through the exercises is a lot of people were placing these improvement stickers around intersections. So we have Cedar Crest and Walbert. We have Cedar Crest and 22. We have Tillman, the interchange, and the Kmart area. And then also this was 309, 22, Ridgeview are all in that hexagon. So one thing we had with, I'll just put, so these are all of the protect and improvement stickers that were placed. One thing we had, we asked people to go ahead and write comments on the maps as they were going, if they wanted to point anything out. We've cataloged those comments, and in the next phase, we're going to release a story map. So just an online map that will allow people to comment on each hexagon. So people will have the opportunity to provide additional comment as to what in that hex they feel needs to be protected or what in that hex needs to be improved.
Hey, David,
yeah.
can I just jump 1 second?
Yeah.
I just curious as to what, I mean, obviously, I think protection speaks for itself, but I'm curious as to how the public was explained what the improvement sticker represented. In other words, improvement in my mind could mean a bunch of different things. It could mean, you know, intersection needs to be repaved, or it could mean we should develop this area. I'm just curious as to what the public understood the improvement sticker represent.
In general, it was, we kind of left it pretty wide open. We didn't try not to kind of steer too much. But what we found is it was primarily around road improvements is the general sentiment that we gathered. Other than the Tillman Square, there was a lot of people were putting dots on that to improve the old Kmart site. So that was some of the other things. And that's one of the reasons that we want to try and get some more comment to see if there's anything that, you know, that we're missing, or any specifics in each hexagon, so that we can focus on that moving forward through the rest of the update.
The one thing that jumped out at me is that if I'm reading this map correctly, the intersection where the Ridge Farm development has, you know, a lot of improvement stickers, and I'm wondering how many of those people thought improvement meant, you know, not to let Ridge Farm go in there. That's why I ask about what the improvement meant to the people who put the stickers there.
If they wanted to not put the, no, so the improvement for in that specific, if they wanted to, that would have been a protection dot. So they wanted to preserve the land as opposed to improve. Not.
I believe when, oh, sorry, this is Dave. I believe when people put their dots on, we were allowed to write to clarify what the dots represented. So if it was an improvement one, we also wrote what the improvement was. If it was protection, we wrote a note what to protect. So we were allowed to, you know, describe what the improvement was that we sought and what the protection was that we sought. So I'm assuming that's in process of getting tabulated.
Yes. So we've collected all those comments, and we have those, and we'll release them when we do the story map, just to kind of get people thinking of what we're looking for. So again, we're giving people another opportunity to elaborate on what to protect or what to fix in those locations.
Got it. Thank you.
So the other thing we asked people to work on was population and employment. If you recall, we kind of took the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission's projections and kind of divided that up and asked people to put dots where they thought that growth should go. So what we did is Greg and I kind of came up with a statistical way to kind of filter out some of the outliers. And because there were so many dots, we had to just categorize. So we categorized high, medium, low, and then some dots had nothing on them. So those are the 4 categories for both population and employment. So here's the map again. 309 and Northeast Extension and Cedar Crest, Walbert, 22 Hamilton. So for the population, this is the results that we received. We have the 1 hex that has a high, and that happens to be the Ridge Farm hex. One of the things we talked about during the exercises was if you feel that Ridge Farm's going to go in, go ahead and put, I forget the number, was it 7 population dots and 2 or 3 two jobs. So that's primarily why that's high. And one thing to kind of keep in mind is with that going in, that took a significant chunk of the population that we used for the projections. And you can kind of see how it's clustered around between Walbert and 22 with some outlying areas. For the jobs, we have 1 high, and that is around the Tillman Square old Kmart site. Some lows around the 309 Walbert area, and then some low jobs kind of along Cedar Crest, North Cedar Crest, and some lows in the Orfield area. So the next thing we did is, of those hexagons that had growth assigned, we determined what type of development, greenfield development being a development on basically a vacant lot or a farm field or a woodland. Infill would be a vacant lot in between existing building or existing development, and redevelopment would be developing another use or another type of development on an existing development. Excuse me. So we took all of those categories, and these are all, this graph kind of represents all the combinations, and what we resulted in were 18 separate combinations that we're going to use to address in the next phase, where we ask people how should each of these combinations look. And I'll get into that in a little more detail. So here's the map again. Northeast Extension, 22, Hamilton, Cedar Crest. So here's the development types. Greenfield, kind of north of the high school. Redevelopment around the chemical plant. Greenfield, some infill, and redevelopment. And then each of those X's have a population is the top line and the employment is the bottom line. So you can see all of the different combinations. And this is what we'll use to ask people how they think that should look. For example, how should a low infill look? What type of development should that look like? How should that develop? When we add the improvement and protection stickers, it adds another layer for people to consider as we start the discussion of how should we grow. If there's improvements, how do we incorporate those improvements moving forward through the rest of the update?
Hey, Dave, can I ask you a quick question before can we step back one second? And I was there, I participated in this, but I'm just trying to remember what does the low, medium, and high in the development type mean?
So we categorize the population and employment. We just use categories rather than counts because there were so many.
Okay.
And we had to simplify. So the top line is the population, and then the bottom line is the employment. So we have in this hex, assuming my cursor's showing up, we have no population but low employment on a redevelopment site. So the idea is
Okay.
we take that and say, all right, under this scenario, how would you like that to grow?
Gotcha.
And on the next slide, I'll go into how we plan on doing that.
Thank you.
So some next steps. I talked about the story maps. So we'll prepare a story map, which is just, it's basically a website with a dynamic map in it that will present the results. So the maps that we saw tonight will be a web page that will provide an opportunity for people to comment by hex. There's just an email link embedded in the hex. So that's probably the immediate next step. And then getting into phase 3 is where we start talking about how should we grow. So the graphic kind of depicts the different combinations and how should each of those combinations look. So, this hex here with the cows would probably be a greenfield none, or a greenfield low population, no employment. So you can kind of see how we can use these photographs to help get an idea of what people want development to look like. And the way we anticipate doing that is through visual preference surveys. So we'll present that combination and then say, give an option of 4 or 5 different photographs and let people kind of rank them or pick which one they like the best. And then we'll use that in conjunction with the where. We will then have the how, and then that will funnel down into the subcommittees, where the subcommittees will evaluate their subject matter as it relates to the where and how, and formulate policies, change policies if they need to be changed, omit, add. So that's kind of the next phase and why we're going through this part of the process, is to be able to inform these subcommittees and give them enough information and kind of keep them on point as to the people wanted, this is where they wanted to grow, this is how they want to grow, how do we formulate the comprehensive plan to make that happen? So that's, yep, that's all I have. George, were we saving questions for the end primarily?
I mean, it's up to the commissioners if they wanted to ask, if you wanted to ask, yeah, I'll look at Tori
I think-
if you want.
Yeah, I think it's best, George. Why don't we do questions per presentation to give people the opportunity to ask after each presentation. So thank you, Dave. Are there any questions or comments from either the Board of Commissioners or the Planning Board before we hit the public?
This is Bill. I just want to, could you give a timeline of the next steps or general where you see this going? In the time
Yeah,
frame?
and we kind of see this how being rolled out through the summer and into September. We have to adjust, and the face-to-face meetings probably aren't going to happen. So we'll probably, I anticipate doing some online presentations where we're holding an online meeting to kind of go through this. So kind of anticipating that through the summer. And then into the fall, we'll break out into the subcommittees. And there may be some overlap with the Phase 4 kickoff meeting, which is where we want to try and have all of our subject matter experts kind of lined up and kind of do a round robin, almost a speed dating thing where you go in with the subject matter expert, talk about things, and then for 15, 20 minutes, and then you go on to another subject matter expert. And the idea is as people go through and listen to each of the subject matter experts, they get to volunteer. They can volunteer for that subcommittee. So that's kind of why we wanted to perhaps run that kickoff meeting earlier, kind of while we're still into maybe the tail end of the how to grow. Again, late summer, fall, early fall kind of thing.
Hi, this is Mike Walk. I have one question. And David, could you come back? I think it's 2 slides. Yeah, this one. Okay, first, I just want to give you some strong positive feedback. I've learned since I've met you that you have a passion for our infrastructure, and you're very educated, and you're excellent at applying data-driven analysis. And probably many people don't know that you keep a database infrastructure for the township that provides tremendous benefits all around. So I just want to compliment you for this latest piece of work and for all the work that you do on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Well deserved. So my question is this. So I kind of think of it, if I look at this, this is an explanation of what the people have given as feedback. And as you've explained, you're going to go forward and talk about how, and you're going to overlay the how. And now I'm just going to make a comment or question that we've all talked about before. The comprehensive plan provides guiding principles, and in order to affect change, it must be complemented with zoning ordinance changes. So am I correct in saying if we take all these results in the comp plan, and mainly I'm looking at this map, we would have to change zoning ordinances in order to reflect this map plus the how?
It's most likely, yes, that you would have to, there would be recommendations coming out of the comprehensive plan to make changes to the zoning ordinance in order to be consistent with this plan as it develops.
Right.
One thing, just with regards to this map, and when we start talking about zoning and, the whole natural features aspect of it, the map is going to be more fine grained when we get to like future land use. This is just kind of, we're starting with a big general picture and slowly focusing it in. And, the next phase is mapping will probably carve up this map into a little more detail, into a lot more detail. So that's kind of how that part of the process works.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions from the public for Dave on this presentation of the phase 2 results and the next steps?
Nothing in the chat box, Commissioner Morgan. If anybody's on the phone and wants to ask a question, that would be the time.
Yeah, leasehold 3731 Manchester Road. David, just a quick question. I remember during the mapping, you had specific requirements that we had to put so many dots for growth. What with Ridge Farms, Country Crossings, and Springview, what was there? Did we have to increase growth in additional to those developments already in place?
So developments that were approved as of the beginning of this process were included in the existing. So if you recall, there was, just little dots that represented the existing population and existing jobs. Those reflected approved development. For example, Hills of Winchester was approved, but it wasn't constructed yet. And we estimated the population for that. Ridge Farm, not approved, so it wasn't included.
Okay. But so the question, so if Ridge Farm is, I forget how many total residents that would be, but in addition to the total that we needed to grow the population in the township, how much more do we need to grow if Ridge Farms is plopped in there and that numbers holds true?
Yeah, it's not an exact science. And the exercise was mainly geared towards finding out where that growth should go. We talked about the amount, and I think our numbers were in the 2,000 to 3,000 increase for both jobs and people. Greg's nodding his head, which is always good. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
I think it might help just to know that the population for what Ridge Farm would be was part of that pot of population that you got for the exercise. So it doesn't add more or subtract more. It just becomes part of that aggregate population projection.
Okay.
I think we have a comment or a thought from Mr. Burke.
Yes, thank you. I believe in one of the early meetings that I participated in, it was stated that the number of dots we got were quite a large number because we were projecting for 20 years. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah, we used the 2045 or 2040 projections from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission.
Okay, so those dots are equivalent to 20 years of growth, not 10 years or 5 years or whatever.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to add that to Lee Salt's comment.
Yep. Good point.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments for this first presentation? Okay, assuming none, next this evening we have a presentation from the traffic engineer, Scott Pastersky, the civil engineer project manager for Keystone Consulting. Scott, welcome.
Good evening. How you doing?
We're doing great. How are you?
Doing good. Okay. Thank you for that introduction. I won't skip that part of my outline then. So just to jump right into the presentation, as part of any comprehensive plan process, and as part of that is we're deciding how to grow and things like that. What comes along with that is with development comes traffic, and we have to think about the potential impacts that traffic will have on the surrounding road network, to the traveling public, increases in congestion potentially, and as we're planning where to put development looking at it from other angles, also consider the impact the traffic will have on the road network, which affects quality of life, it affects commerce. Air quality with more cars on the road becomes an issue, more so than normal. And you could even make an argument that it could affect safety as more cars are on the road. There's more of a potential for conflicts and things like that, and driver frustrations, etc. So traffic has to go along with this entire process. So we've worked in that regard, we're in the process of working on several aspects of transportation tools and analyses that will assist with that planning effort. And we're going to go over a few of those tonight, and then some are underway, and there's a few more aspects of the process that have not been started and really couldn't have been started yet until the additional workshops have been held and more decisions are made with regards to planning. But what I'd like to do is just kind of step you through what we've prepared, or we've started to prepare so far, to give you an update to the process. So the first thing we're doing, if you see the map on the screen, do I have the ability to point with this, David?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Where do you want me to point?
Well, I think actually the red lines, I don't have to do quite as much as you had to, because the red lines are already identified on there. So I can just, I'll call out the road name, and if you don't mind pointing to the road name as I call it out. So the first item that we looked at doing is developing a base traffic model. And that base traffic model is a model that can be used for comparison. And it's basically, the goal of it is to the existing condition plus any development that might be in the pipeline, as David was saying before, approved development that maybe just not constructed yet, but that's our base condition. And if you can see the road network there that we had selected, the base model would be useful for that comparison. It's a baseline. And so in order to determine which corridors, which intersections were worthy of our consideration, we kind of took our cue from the workshops and the hexagonal maps that were prepared. And based on where the development was anticipated to go, we made selections on that basis. So the two things that would contribute to that would be, obviously, if there's development directly along one of the routes, a road network that, with intersections and whatnot, that was selected and added. So that would be Walbert Avenue, which runs basically east and west. That would be the 309 corridor from Ridgeview Drive all the way up to Limekiln Road. That would be Cedar Crest Boulevard. Hang with me for a second, but Cedar Crest Boulevard from Walbert Avenue to the north all the way to Orfield Road. And no, I didn't forget the line below Walbert, but I'm going to include that in a different category. So it affects the developments around the road network, but it also has to anticipate where that traffic would be expected to go. There's a lot of destination points, namely, Route 22, Hamilton Boulevard, I-78, Route 309. Traffic from these developments aren't just going to stay along those adjacent roadways. They have to go places. So we have expanded the network to include Cedar Crest Boulevard to the south of Walbert Avenue, also to include the Hamilton Boulevard corridor. And felt it would be prudent to also include the Tillman Street corridor. There's not a lot there, but just to be complete, felt it was important to include that. So I don't know if you can make out the colors on this map very well, but the yellow dots are intersections that we've had some progress on, and we've got some preliminary modeling started with that. And it's kind of indistinguishable here, but the orange dots, which is a little different shade of yellow, really what it looks like, are analyses that have not been started yet, but are going to be performed, that we need to add to the model. And the blue dots in the middle there, right on Cedar Crest and Tillman, are intersections that are technically not in South Whitehall Township, but understanding that traffic doesn't understand municipal boundaries, traffic, it's up for consideration. We're not sure if we should study or not, just for for validity of the study. It is outside the township limits, but the traffic from these developments could potentially affect those intersections. So we're still open to suggestions and consideration as to whether or not we should include those blue intersections that are technically in the city of Allentown. Another point of note, by the way, I tend to talk fast and take short breaths between sentences, so just jump in if anybody has a question midstream here, and I will listen. But the next thing to consider here is that the intersections shown there are signalized intersections. We're looking for places that could affect the congestion amounts on the roadway. There's obviously more intersections than those shown, unsignalized intersections, which obviously if you add more traffic to the through traffic, then the side street becomes more difficult to pull out of. But for right now, the focus of the study is congestion on the corridors as a result of new development. So with that said, I'll move on to the next aspect here. So like I said before, we're building a base model that includes these intersections. Basically it's the intersections that make up the bulk of the analysis, or all of the analysis. And that model, what we're using for that, it's probably something most of you have not heard of before. It's called the intersection capacity utilization model. And I should say something on the outset here. The study we're doing, the traffic model that we're building, is different than a traffic model that you would prepare typically for a traffic impact study that, say, a developer would submit as part of their development plans. That is a very deep dive, detailed look, focuses on, fractions of a second of delay, increase, and things like that, detailed signal timings, signal timing plan dependent. It's, usually the reports are, multiple inches thick, because I'm sure if you've ever seen a traffic impact study, it makes a nice paperweight or something like that, but it's quite a substantial study. This analysis, using this ICU method, as it's called, is ideal for planning applications because the set of input data is much less than would be for a full-blown, robust traffic impact study. So we basically need to input traffic, the lanes, the lane configurations at each intersection, which is obviously available from PennDOT, Google Earth even, and it's not dependent on a timing plan. It's depending on the lanes and obviously the volumes that are on the roadway. And that's basically it. If you have the number of lanes and the turning maneuvers of the lanes and you have the volumes, we can get an estimate of how that intersection is functioning or how it will function when future development will be added to it. So, with that said, in order to get our traffic volumes, we, wherever possible, there's a lot of traffic impact studies that have been submitted in the township. And so we've been able to find a lot of those I had in my email inbox or in our server in our office some places. Greg graciously provided a massive study that I didn't have for this. And so the studies that were already done, paid for by development dollars, we're able to use and kind of springboard off of that work. And at this base level of analysis, we're able to include the traffic information from those studies to get our baseline data for that. So it's been very helpful. It doesn't cover all the intersections. Sometimes we do have to make some engineering assumptions. There is PennDOT data that they publish for traffic volumes, so we're able to manipulate that. And but wherever possible, if we can use the work that's been done before, we're trying to do that. So anyway, the actual model outputs that are going to be provided, as you can see in the the measures of effectiveness there at the bottom of the slide. The intersection capacity utilization, don't be afraid of that term. All that means is how much more traffic can this intersection take? So if you had an intersection capacity utilization of 50%, that means you could add 50% more traffic. If you have an intersection capacity utilization of, say, 120%, that means this intersection is over capacity and you should, multiple cycles of signal not clearing, a lot of frustrated drivers, some horns perhaps. So that's all that means. Our outputs, our measures of effectiveness will include that. It will also include a letter grade level of service. The way to always describe this, it's probably many of you have heard this before, just like a report card in school, level of service of A is great. That means there's basically no congestion, traffic is moving freely. And this actually method, it doesn't stop with level of service F. I won't go into that kind of detail right now. It's not really critical to the conversation, but it actually takes it all the way down to a level of service G, which is bad. That means the intersection's over capacity and things are bad. It's not something anyone's going to be happy with, basically, unless someone wants traffic congestion for some reason. The other output is there's a qualitative description of the intersection performance. If you do a detailed traffic study that would be submitted, like say with a development, those studies will have a different methodology. Again, it'll be based on delay to a fraction of a second. This is a qualitative measure. So it'll say level service B is, good congestion or minimal congestion, traffic moves most of the time, occasional queues. It's a qualitative, very kind of a loose measure of traffic effectiveness. Again, ideal for a planning study. Before I go on, there's one other aspect. So we're building this base model, and this base model, as the future planning exercises take place, we will layer other layers of traffic on top of the base model and to see what the impact is to the intersections. And from there, we can plan, anticipate where future intersection improvements might be needed, road widening, turn lanes, things like that. Again, it will not be as detailed as a true traffic impact study, but it will give us, from a planning standpoint, an idea of what to expect, to know what's going down the road. I'm going to maybe take a quick pause, and before I go into the next aspect of what we're preparing for the planning efforts, since I know I just probably gave you a lot of information, if anybody has any questions regarding the base model or the intersections or perhaps some of the routes that we've selected, probably a good time to stop and ask those, listen to those questions now.
Thanks, Scott.
I have a couple
was there any? Okay, Commissioner Walk.
Yes, thank you. This is right in line with right where you were at, Scott. So it's come up in other meetings. Does the township now have, and does Scott also have the designated PennDOT road improvements? It's an actual question. If Scott's looking at, what the modeling is for the future capacity, he should know what the road improvements are going to be. So does the township have that information, and does he have it as well?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the TIP, right, Commissioner Walt? The TIP projects that are.
Yeah.
Yeah. If Scott doesn't have it, we can certainly, that's managed through the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission and PennDOT District 5, and we can certainly get that information to him if he doesn't already have it.
Okay, I couldn't hear everything you said, but I think we're saying if you would make it available to Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So if right now, so that letter you did at the start of the meeting was actually, they're updating the TIP right now. But typically those projects stay pretty much the same, as you know, because they're on there for an awful long time, because they have to go through that 4-phase process: engineering, right-of-way acquisition, construction, the whole thing. So that is updated every 2 years at the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, but although it's a 4-year plan. But that letter that you basically offered at the beginning showed those projects. Bill had laid them out in that letter that were germane to South Whitehall Township. So that's available through PennDOT or the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. And yes, we have, we had that, and you can get that to Scott anytime. I'm sure Scott already has it.
Okay.
whatever we need.
And I have, I'm sorry, I have one more question. So looking at this map, it looks like these are mostly PennDOT roads. Maybe there's a non-PennDOT road in there. So our township had a recent learning. We were placing all our weight on the PennDOT traffic study. This was around Ridge Farms, and we all learned that at least a proactive traffic study hadn't been done around a non-PennDOT road, heavily traveled road like Huckleberry Road. The question is, might there be some consideration for including some non-PennDOT roads based on their significance for future traffic, given the amount of development and the locations of the development, as David Manhart described in the first presentation?
I think I can answer that if that's also the question. That certainly could be considered, yes. I think the answer to that would be to really determine, this is our first shot at it based on the preliminary studies and the maps that we've done with the hexagons. But as we get more into this is a progressive thing, and more information becomes available, and we know what the developments are, or have an idea what they would be, and we start to get into the next stage of this, which would be to take the trips from those developments and distribute them to the road network, and or we find that these other roads should be included, then we could certainly expand this model. It wouldn't be hard to do to expand it. So I guess we keep our eyes open. If we need to expand it, we absolutely could. Or if somebody feels like we should right now, we can just go ahead and add Huckleberry Road, for example. But I didn't, at the information we had so far, I didn't see that as being as critical, but we can certainly add.
If I could just jump in, Scott. One thing that involving Scott at this point in the process allows the capability to, Commissioner Walk talked about traffic improvements. In all of those traffic impacts studies, proposed improvements are included. Those can get accounted for in the model. I think as Scott described, when you're modeling the intersection, if that intersection has proposed changes based on an approved plan, that can certainly be incorporated into the model. And with regards to traffic impact studies for approved development, if there's intersections that raise a flag because of that development, they can certainly be added, and I suspect they will be. So I think in addition to incorporating TIP projects, the ability to incorporate proposed improvements from proposed development is one of the things that I'm pretty excited about with the potential for this model.
Agree.
All right. I think we might go ahead.
Hold on. Excuse me. Speaking of TIP projects, I don't see the 309 Tillman Street interchange project on this model. And I think that could be a game changer for our whole community. So I think that should be increased there and take Tillman Street to all the way out to the Turnpike interchange at least. Because there's a series of lights there that can be problematic. So that's just my thought.
Okay, so noted. I've jotted that down. As we get, like I said before, as we dive into more of the details, we'll know where the impacts are going to be more. And this, I suspect that what you're looking there is going to evolve a little bit and grow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So any other comments from the board? I know we have some comments from the public Any other comments from either of the boards? Okay, so we do have a question or a comment from Mr. Burke.
Yes, thank you, Dave Burke, Buck Trail Road. We addressed development, I think, on the maps with housing developments and so forth. I don't recall if we addressed industrial development, but we have the warehouses with about 600 trucks, tractor trailers a day coming out onto 309 at Ridgeview. And again, I didn't want us to forget that if it's not part of what we're looking at.
Right. Certainly. The model that we're using is pretty scaled back. The inputs for trucks they don't exist. You just put in the volume data. It's a very generic evaluation. However, understanding the trucks are a real factor as part of a detailed traffic impact study that would need to come. Those are absolutely would be included.
Okay, so Greg gave you those, or he will give you those.
I have most of the studies. If there's a few more I'm missing, we'll find them and get them. But I think for anything where there's a yellow dot, I was able to either have volumes for or manufacture, come up with some volumes based on PennDOT data.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right. I don't see any of the other comments popping up in the chat. So, Scott, if you would like to continue.
Right. Yep. Thank you. Okay. The last part of what we're working on currently is, in addition to the base model, is to prepare what we're calling a traffic planning handbook. And so this would be a tool, really a pocket reference, if you will, or something that the planning group would use, would have each member could have a packet in front of them with basically some tools to help them with some very basic traffic information as they're planning development, planning what goes where, what development would be suitable for this area or along this roadway frontage. There's some information that would be prepared, for the non-traffic engineer, but it would be based in traffic documents that would, hopefully would be a handy reference. So all that work ahead of time, you don't have to look through, thick manuals and regulations. We try to boil it down to get to just the information that would be important for a planning exercise. So specifically, that would be, we're going to have about a page or two of trip generation rates for typical land uses. So for example, a convenience market is a small little facility, typically, relatively speaking, but packs quite a punch when it comes to the amount of traffic it generates, as opposed to, another facility that might look, it might have a larger square footage, but the traffic impacts to that, or the traffic generation characteristics, might be significantly different. So this just gives there are a few numbers on the sheet, so we can't eliminate numbers altogether, but I did try to make it, in the process of trying to make that user friendly. So it's you don't have to be a traffic engineer to comprehend it, but it hopefully will be a helpful resource as the planners start their exercises. The other thing we thought would be important to keep in mind during planning operations would be the future LV plan that the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission has prepared. And it would just be a summary of bullet points, again, a page or two of information, pre-digested, so that the planners would know, okay, here's what the LVPC was thinking as they prepared the future LV plan, and they can then choose to consider that feedback or not consider that feedback, but at least at a glance what a prior study had determined. And lastly, was to consider any input with regards to transportation and other modes of transportation. When you think about it, public transportation will serve to decrease traffic volumes if it's utilized. There are certain development types that will be more typically used by public transit riders and things like that. Certain aspects of that, some details. I've had a great conversation with a representative from Atlanta, and the document has not been prepared yet, but it'll give you a summary of bullet point considerations as developments are planned, and whether or not it's feasible or how to make it feasible to get public transportation to serve those areas with the overall goal of reducing, coming up with a scenario that reduces traffic impacts as well as balance other priorities. And I did forget something. Under the ITE trip generation rates, there will also be some information there that will give you some basic information as to certain combinations of uses that would result in a reduction of trips. So what I mean by that is if you have a retail store on the same lot, as a office building on the same lot as, an above ground second floor apartment complex, say, just to throw out some examples, they wouldn't all generate new trips. There would be a lot of shared trips between the uses. And so there can be reduction in traffic if certain uses are paired together in certain formats. And so there'll be some guidance, there will be some numbers there, but it'll be some pretty straightforward guidance as to what would be some winning combinations from a traffic standpoint. So that's the other aspect of the information we're working on currently. And then, following that, once that is established and the planning groups have done their exercises and we have some more information to work with, we're going to take a few other steps. So just to quickly go over our next steps, and then we can open it back up for questions. But the first step would be to layer on any future developments like Ridge Farm that is not approved yet, that potentially could be part of the traffic stream. In the future, we'd want to layer that onto the traffic model. We'd want to take the developments that had been identified, the types of developments, the locations of those developments, and using the same ITE trip generation manual, which I didn't explain that. That's an industry standard for trip generation. It's used nationwide. But we would take the development types that were determined by the planning groups, and then determine what is their anticipated trip generation. We would then distribute that traffic to the network, to the intersections that we had identified for focus, and then rerun our traffic model, see what the impacts are, and from there we can tell where there's any hot spots, any intersections that maybe are pushed over capacity or operating at a worse level of service than they were prior, and where we can anticipate the likelihood of future improvements. However that's done, whether that's through a developer funded improvement, through a TIP funded project, or a municipal funded project, we can at least identify where you should kind of keep an eye out for that those improvements to be warranted perhaps. So that's what we would kind of see as our next steps. I guess the other alternative there is to modify the plan development a little bit to better favor lessen the amount of road improvements if that would be warranted or feasible. So that's what we've done so far. We don't have anything necessarily to show for it yet, but there has been quite a bit of work done so far that we anticipate to have together in the near future. Most likely that could be shared via story map or posted to the township's blog, and whatever the appropriate way to do that is what we'll do. That's all I had to present. If there was any other questions.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any other questions from the board, either board, for Scott before we hit the public for any questions? Okay, George, are you seeing anything on chat? I'm not seeing anything on chat.
I do not.
Okay. All right, thank you, Scott, so very much. All right, next this evening, our third presentation is the presentation from land use economist Todd Poole, president and founder and managing principal of 4Word Planning Incorporated. Todd, welcome.
Hey, before he starts, Dave, are you going to make him presenter so he can?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to do it? You want me to do it?
I guess whoever's faster, yeah.
I got it right here. Hold on one second.
Yep, looks like Todd's the organizer now. Yep.
Where did he go?
Todd, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, great.
I want to present it to.
It said he was the organizer there for a second.
All right,
yep.
You should be good now.
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, do you see the screen?
Sure do.
Okay, super. I'll get started. Let me start just by saying that this is a very high-level presentation to provide, I think, some general guidance regarding what is likely to happen over the next 36 months, certainly, and probably in the years beyond. And this is based on current information that my company, myself particularly, has been following, regarding industries and land use, patterns and trends, and also what's happening to the broader economy. So all of that, bringing that together, what we're trying to show you is likely trends that will have influence on South Whitehall Township's comprehensive plan. Okay, let's see here. All right, so this is in general what we're going to cover in this presentation, the major land uses of housing, retail. I'm breaking out restaurants, entertainment venues from retail because they really do need to have their separate category because there's a significant impact related to particular uses: office, light industrial, and recreation. All right, so what we're going to do is walk through what's been happening or had been happening pre-pandemic, the things that we had been experiencing and observing. In this case, talking about housing. Since the end of the Great Recession, 2007, 2009 recession event, and really, once we got beyond 2010, 2011, housing prices had started to recover. And more particularly, what we saw was, with regard to residential development, that there was a sharp uptick in development of luxury apartments and townhomes in particular. And I say luxury specifically because that's where the development community was kind of making their investments. The luxury market generally was paying higher margins as it was more difficult to get construction labor, cost of materials were increasing. It just made sense for the industry to target luxury housing development and again, particularly multifamily rental and townhomes. We also saw, coming out of the Great Recession, an increase in rental versus owner-occupied units. A lot of that having to do with the fact that there are, tens of thousands, if not millions, of homeowners or former homeowners who lost possession of their housing as a result of defaulting on their mortgages. Obviously, one of the principal reasons underpinning the recession was a housing bubble and loose lending standards and so forth. So that stands to reason, and a lot of rental development took place, and so you saw a rise relative to owner-occupied housing. Studios 1 and 2 bedroom units were kind of the flavor du jour, and really still are. And that has a lot to do with demographic trends. Studios 1 to 2 bedrooms is a result of smaller households being formed. Households can be one person or more than one person, as defined by the Census Bureau. And a more than one person household can, be a non-family household. In other words, people that are unrelated by marriage, birth, blood relations, or any other legal construct. And there was just an explosion or a proliferation of the demand for these smaller units. And that is likely, pre-COVID, that was the case. I'm going to get into the reason why that may not be the case coming post-COVID. The other trend that was big, house transit, or what we refer to as transit-oriented development, or TODs, was also very big over the last decade. That still may be the case. However, I will say this: obviously, no one is looking to jump on mass transit systems anytime soon. Obviously, mass transit systems bringing people in very close proximity and highly dense you know, vessels that they be, you know, they're kind of not in high demand at this particular moment. Retail, the comparison category, and comparison, what we're really talking about are retailers such as Sears, Kohl's, Target. You can walk into a store, pick up an item, and look at its price, and then walk out and walk into a competing retailer and look at that same item and look at their price. That's comparison retail, which in large measure were department stores and anchor retailers and shopping centers. Those types of retailers had been struggling well before the pandemic. As a matter of fact, probably going back 8 to 10 years, and particularly because of e-commerce, right? The pandemic, and I'll say this probably more than once, has helped to accelerate certain trends that were already in motion. So in this particular case, the kind of the death of the department store or the acceleration of its expiration. Oversupply correction was still underway. And again, that's kind of the brick and mortar retail that was overbuilt over the last 20, 25 years. You're seeing, seeing those things happen now with the announcements of bankruptcy filings by, such, pillars of the retail markets, JCPenney, Nordstrom's. Recently, Pier 1 announced it's going, into bankruptcy and liquidating all of its merchandise and closing its stores. Sears is not long for the world as well, and so on.
Did we lose you, Todd?
So there, Todd?
Where's the Todd?
We lost him. Is he still connected?
He appears to be. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Still on I still see him on the screen.
See if I can send a quick message here.
He's presenting.
I'm not sure what happened because he is on the screen.
Dave, do you have a phone number for him? Do we have a phone number to call Todd? I hope he's not continuing to talk thinking everybody's hearing him.
Yeah, he's showing us connected to everything, so I don't know what happened. I just sent him a note through the text box, but Dave Manhart, do you have his telephone number? Are you trying to know?
He's calling him.
Yeah, he's showing up as off now for some reason, so he got disconnected somehow.
We'll give him a minute or two. George.
Okay.
Everybody can get up and stretch their legs and get a snack. What do we got, Dave Manhart? Okay. Be back in, George?
Not yet. I'm looking for him here. Because I'll probably have to turn it back over to him again, because I think you fall out of presenter organizer when you're out of meeting. Well, I still see his presentation up.
Yeah, his presentation was up. He just,
Move to the next
Dave, we
step.
good?
He
How are we,
lost
Dave?
power.
Oh,
Yes.
so
So
is he unable to finish the presentation?
he can call in
Okay.
and kind of, I mean, he doesn't even have the presentation in front of him, but he could probably just kind of talk about things that he remembers.
Well, that's a good idea. Maybe you can just read him the title of the slide, say pre-pandemic trends, and he can tell you what he knows about it, and we'll go from there.
I mean, I don't even have a copy of the presentation is the other thing. So he's going to call in and maybe just do a question and answer or something. And we could, if depending on how it goes, we can maybe reschedule and run it another time. But he should.
Okay, well, let's just take him. Oh, there he is. Is that him?
Hey there. I am back, and thank God for a cell phone.
Oh, yeah. So Todd, it's my understanding from Dave that you lost power, and we're sorry for that. And so you don't have the presentation, but if you want to do the best you can at giving just a vocal presentation, and then we can do a visual presentation at a later time, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that's fine, and I can certainly do that. As it turns out, just the entire neighborhood where I am lost power, so it wasn't just me; it was everybody.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and there's no storm.
Nope,
no
no
storm or anything.
problem.
So, okay, all right. So I think I left off with retail rather, and here's the long and the short of it: is retail leading up to pre-COVID was already in some form of transformation, and that is to say that major shopping center sites, particularly major anchors of those shopping centers, were struggling. And as I think I was noting before I went silent, you're seeing major bankruptcies, which is obviously going to continue and accelerate as a result of the larger economy being shut down. That will obviously have influence, and we'll talk about that shortly. The next category that I was going to talk about is office. And office, like retail, too, was going through a transformation, a significant one, and a lot of that having to do with technology and also where the talent wanted to be, the talent in this case being millennial workers and younger Gen Xers. I can tell you firsthand that in some of the work that I've done, and I've had conversations with real estate executives for major corporations who have a lot of real estate assets, and many of them have either moved already or are already making plans to move from suburban areas into more urbanized areas, because at least, again, leading up to this moment in time, that's where younger workers wanted to be, or want to be, in terms of having access to mass transit systems, restaurants, and a lot of amenities in close walking proximity. Okay, so that, again, leading up to this moment. I think the other key thing here is to understand is, as I mentioned, technology has made it a lot easier for workers to work remotely, and obviously we're experiencing that now on a mass scale. So this whole experiment that we are going through right now is just accelerated, I think, the transformation of the office industry, office market, and I'll talk about that, what that means for a South Whitehall Township in a moment. Next, light industrial. Light industrial has been a land use category that has been something of a darling in real estate for the past, at least 10 years, and is only solidifying that position in part because of the rise of e-commerce, and of course more particularly now, the rise of e-commerce, because everybody's locked down. They can't go to stores, and we're all, for ordering anything or shopping for anything, we're doing it online. So that combined with other types of need or demand for warehouse space or light assembly space has been on the rise. And you in South Whitehall Township has probably been experiencing that, and you will continue to experience that. I'll talk about that in a second. But that is a land use class that has strength, and certainly coming on the other side of the on the other side of the pandemic, that particular category, in my opinion, will only grow. And I'll say this: it is likely to grow. Also because of the talk about nationalizing the supply chain. That is to say, to bring more of the supply network that is currently strewn around the globe, at least some of it, back to the United States. That too will create greater demand for light industrial space in a lot of different places. Restaurants and bar, I think that's what I skipped over and I was about to get to. Restaurants and entertainment venues. Interestingly, these particular land use categories help to drive the revitalization of urban areas in particular. And for those of you who've traveled into places like, most closely to you, the Allentowns of the world, and certainly the larger cities such as Philadelphia, New York, and just more urbanized locations generally, the revitalization of those places has occurred in particular because of what we'll refer to as experience type retail. These are places where you're not buying, goods or things as much as you're buying an experience. And restaurants really represent that, right? You're going there, you're having a meal, you're usually with family or friends, and you're having an experience. Over the last 10, 12 years, there has been an explosion of that type of business and land use throughout the United States, and again, more particularly in urbanized areas and even in suburban areas. And that's also been complemented by entertainment venues such as bowling alleys, and I'll throw, kind of just standalone bars into that mix, and other similar types of venues. So this has been occurring. This has also been driven or underpinned by the growth in discretionary income. That is not to say that the American consumer is better off than they were 20, 30 years ago, because I can tell you from, looking at data from a real income perspective, we're actually worse off. But just the fact that, more people had jobs and the jobs are paying fairly well, relatively speaking, and a lot more discretionary income was being spent on restaurants, bars, and entertainment. So that's, again, leading into the pandemic where we found ourselves. And then finally, recreation. In this case, what I'm talking about is public recreation. So parks, trails, civic space that are spaces that are controlled by municipal and county government. I think leading up to this moment in time, there has been something of a resurgence in people using these spaces, certainly in local government and nonprofits investing in these spaces. And that is not likely to change. As a matter of fact, I will say it is likely to increase for a variety of reasons, not least of which is it is a low-cost means of recreating and getting outside. And obviously in the current period of time, those are things that people really want to do. Okay, so that's a kind of an overview of, leading up to this moment in time. Now, what are we looking at over the next 3 years, what I refer to as the near term, or the next 36 months for these different land use categories? Housing is probably one of the most difficult to predict. However, I'll say this. I think the big takeaway for housing is that with a lot of uncertainty in the job market and a lot of people just not returning to jobs ever again, or at least, a lot of businesses not, opening their doors ever again, meaning that some of these job losses will be permanent. That will necessitate people having to double and triple up, into somebody's home. Okay. Whereas the trend leading to this moment in time had been a lot of household creation of smaller household units, one person, two person households. I think that trend will pause, if not reverse entirely over the next 3 years, as people are, financially unable to either rent or certainly purchase their own place. So what does that mean in terms of housing? I think what you're looking at is maybe a return to developers wanting to build 3 and perhaps 4 bedroom units, whether they be townhouses or apartments, or certainly single family detached homes. But I think the larger bedroom count units will come back into favor, if for no other reason that households are going to grow in size because of financial pressures. I also think that over the next few years, you will see, developers petitioning to build 2 and 4 family housing units, and not, studios, 1 and 2 bedroom rental apartments, right? Again, this is all to help facilitate families and larger households, basically domicile together and save money. I think that will be a trend in the near term, certainly, if not even over the longer term. And regarding single-family detached housing, which I recognize that South Whitehall Township has certainly a lot of, I would expect that there to be something of a pause on development of such housing going forward. Again, in part because of financial reasons. Here's what's going to happen in the mortgage market. Lending standards are already becoming more strict. Credit scores are going to have to be higher. You're going to have to demonstrate you've got a solid job history. They're going to probably be more stringent on down payments and so forth. I mean, basically, the mortgage industry is saying, look, we're at serious risk right now making loans, which means they necessarily have to tighten up on their lending standards. That will translate into fewer people being able to purchase homes, whether new or existing. And that will further translate into fewer single-family, developments being built. So I would expect that at least over the next 3 years, and while we're still dealing with COVID, to be the case. I think as we saw out of the Great Recession, there will still be demand and obviously an appetite by developers to build rental for the obvious reasons. But again, I think the rental that they're going to be looking to build may be slightly different, if only to accommodate larger, numbers of people in the same unit. So that's housing over the next 3 years in a nutshell. Retail, I think you're going to see more of the same. It's just going to accelerate with regard to store closures. Obviously, you have the Kmart site, which clearly is going to tip in this direction of being economically obsolescent. It will present itself as a redevelopment site. And I can tell you from the work that we do, we also work for developers, and I've gotten a number of calls in the last few months, saying, look, get ready. We're well capitalized. We're going to be looking to come in and acquire, properties on the cheap. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to have developers coming in, looking at underperforming retail sites or retail sites that are economically obsolescent. They will come in and acquire these sites and look to repurpose them for probably a mix of uses, not least of which residential. So a site like the Kmart site, I would say, if you're looking to get it back on the rolls as a more productive, rateable, you'd be thinking in terms of what zoning is appropriate for that. And I'll get to that momentarily. So, major retail, even, smaller retailers, and this I think also applies to restaurants, those that are independent and less well capitalized coming into this are the likely victims coming out of this. In other words, they're not likely to reopen simply because they had little cash cushion. And what does that mean? It means for both restaurants and for retailers, probably the chains are the ones that are going to weather the storm best, simply because they had a larger cash cushion to do so. And so you're going to see fewer independents, mom and pops, at least in the near term, certainly, and even perhaps over the longer term. I will say this. There were way too many restaurants to begin with before COVID-19 hit. As a matter of fact, I've always been surprised in the last few years how many restaurants there were. And, when you, do the research and you hear anecdotally how thin their profit margins were, it confirmed that fact. There were too many to begin with, and it only took an event like this to basically sweep aside the less well-off, or at least the restaurants that were weaker in terms of finances. So coming out on the other side of this, we're going to have fewer restaurants, fewer independent retailers, and a lot more e-commerce going on. It's not to say that everything gets swept, it's just that you're going to have fewer of those types of ratables in the near term, certainly. And let me say this too, that, you know, that also applies to places such as bowling alleys and bars and places that ordinarily depend on a lot of people patronizing them and being in tight quarters. You know, over the next 3 years, there are going to be a lot of people, whether they have the money or not, who are not going to have the inclination to patronize such a place for fear of contracting, you know, the virus. And, you know, we still don't know when, obviously, we're going to have a vaccine for it, how widely distributed it's going to be. So it is unclear when people will actually feel safe. And a lot of what I'm talking about has a lot to do with consumer psychology and consumer behavior. You know, unless and until they feel safe, the bounce back for commercial businesses is really, you know, in question. So that's what we're talking about over the next 3 years. Light industrial, I think over the next 3 years is going to start to ramp up. I think you're going to see developers and business owners come in with seeking approvals and more particularly seeking approvals probably for underperforming retail sites like the Kmart site. Right? So it's going to be a question of, is the developer who wants to build mixed-use residential with a little bit of retail at a site like that, or is it the developer who wants to reposition the Kmart site for light industrial purposes, you know, or to use the Kmart site as a fulfillment center, or you know, some other, you know, an Amazon coming in and saying we want to buy that site and turn it into a fulfillment center, which is also what is happening right now with abandoned anchor stores around the country. So, you know, I would say be on the lookout for that and be considering how you're going to handle that within your comprehensive plan policies as well as your ultimate zoning ordinances. Recreation, I would think that you need to prepare for that. That the demand for public recreation to continue to rise, and you know, this will also present an opportunity for revenue generation.
You guys there?
In other words,
Dave or George?
Yes. Hello. Did I stop?
George.
Tori?
I'm not hearing anybody.
I'm here. Hello.
We hear
I
you.
can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Should I pause or continue?
Maybe give her 1 second here to see if she can. Yeah, hook back up.
Oh, you there?
Yep, can you hear us?
Here.
Oh,
Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yep.
All right. So I was talking about recreation, and as a land use for the public sector specifically, I think that will continue to see increased demand, not only from local residents, but from people from outside the area. And I think this is a moment in time where you can take advantage of that and look at some, you know, not all certainly, but at least some of your zones, public spaces, and recreational areas to see where there is opportunity to create revenue generation, whether that's in partnership, kind of a public-private partnership, or doing it on your own. And the reason that I say this is in this moment of economic uncertainty, in this moment of millions of people who've lost their jobs and millions who will never return to whatever those jobs were, clearly there are going to be people that are not going to have the discretionary income to go into a restaurant or to a bar or whatever, but yet, you know, having inexpensive public recreation available to them is going to be meaningful. So, you know, as I said, this is an opportunity to perhaps bolster those resources, maybe rethink some of the resources that you have and how they're positioned to provide different types of recreation. I'll give you for example, as you probably have heard or seen, drive-in theaters are experiencing a renaissance, right? And but no surprise there. You don't have to be in a crowded theater. You can be in your own car. And oh, by the way, drive-in theaters have become more technologically savvy. So they're digitally oriented. You can tune your cell phone to whatever channel they say to get the sound on, and there you have it. There's nothing to say that a municipality such as South Whitehall Township couldn't do something similar, again, as a recreational feature in the summertime and the fall, and have pop-up, drive-in theater area. Again, this might be a public-private partnership, or it might be an opportunity to attract a private operator to do so. So that's just an example. There are others, perhaps putting out an RFP for someone to operate a kiosk that, sells, drinks, snacks, or light food fare. Again, under the recognition that you're going to see an increase in your public spaces being used, park space, civic space being used. So, I'll cut to the chase. I mean, really, all that I've mentioned, you want to think in terms of how your zoning is going to facilitate the investment, for the changes that I talked about, and coming up with zoning changes that would include looking at form-based code, that would include looking at an expedited permitting process, to allow for development to happen sooner rather than later. That would include, looking at a site like the Kmart site or other similar shopping center sites and saying, look, they're never going to be what they were or what they were intended to be. Are we comfortable with allowing this to be mixed-use residential, or are we comfortable with allowing this to be light industrial? And if so, let's look at changing the zoning sooner rather than later, because that's an investment that'll obviously pay off in terms of being a tax rateable. I don't think I've got to tell at least the governing body members that are on this call that if you haven't already, you can very well expect you're going to be getting a lot of tax appeals from at least, retail operators or retail shopping center site operators, because obviously the value of those properties is going to plummet dramatically. And so maybe the best way to counter that is to say, okay, let's look at what is market receptive going forward, and let's get that zoning in place as soon as possible, such that we can, basically shorten the length of time that the rateable value is low and get it turned around. So that's my best recollection of what I was going to present. I'm telling you, it was much better in color.
That was excellent. So you did a great job. I apologize for interrupting. I lost all my sound there for a second, and I thought we lost you again. So, but great job.
Sure.
Are there any questions or comments? Wow, that was a lot of very interesting information. Any questions or comments from either of the boards before we hit the public for some thoughts?
I just have a question for Todd. Where is the good news?
They don't call us dismally. They don't call us the dismal science for nothing.
Hey, Joe,
no,
the good news is that drive-ins are coming back.
There you go. There you go. I got very excited when I saw that. I was like, wow. No, here's the thing. There is good news in this, in that, while yes, there's a lot of destruction going on with regard to business and jobs. At the same time, and as this happens, and as happens coming out of most recessions, there's also a good deal of creation, whether it's jobs or new business, new technologies, right? And I'll say this, South Whitehall Township, I don't have to tell you this, is obviously a township that is, whose residents are well-educated, affluent, right? These are the people who start businesses, right? The fastest growing segment of entrepreneurship in the United States, and which has been over the last decade plus, perhaps 2 decades, is focused within folks who are 50 years of age and older. And it stands to reason. These are people that have had careers, who've built up equity in their homes, who have, undergrad and graduate degrees, and all of this you have a lot of a very good representation of in South Whitehall Township. So I say this to say, and for those on the call who are residents, that this is also an opportunity for entrepreneurs to step forward. And I'll give you a case example. The restaurants that go under, and there will be many, okay, they will leave behind the apparatus of a restaurant, i.e. a kitchen. Up until this point, there has been a growth of communities, mostly in urban areas, but even in some suburban areas, which have purposely developed commercial kitchens. Usually they've been developed by nonprofits, but for the sole purpose of allowing would-be entrepreneurs, restaurateurs to come in and use those commercial kitchens to kind of perfect whatever it is that they're, developing for menu purposes or what have you, which then spawns, that entrepreneur into a restaurant. That could be an opportunity in this particular case, that not all of these restaurants will necessarily have to be entirely dark, right? There will also be opportunities for some of the vacant retail space to be converted into a co-working operation. While a lot of people are fleeing urban areas, and this is probably what I left out that I think is important for everybody to understand, it is suburban areas like yours that are actually going to become more popular. So you want good news? The good news is this: as the whole work remotely concept sticks, hopefully this time because of what is going on, and corporate CEOs and other executives realize that, hey, our workers can be just as productive telecommuting as, coming into the office. And oh, by the way, we're going to save money by downsizing our corporate footprint. Not everybody who's working remotely can do so long term from their kitchen table or from that, second bedroom that maybe is not suitable for the office. So I definitely see opportunity for some of the shopping center space that will go dark to be converted, at least a portion of which, into co-working space. So there's all these opportunities that will spring up as a result of all the different, disruption that is currently taking place. So there is good news.
Thank you.
Todd, I had a question. This is Diane Kelly. Obviously, you're talking about the next 3 years for this post-COVID impact that obviously it is changing daily, monthly as the economy starts to come back and we get into the yellow and then soon hopefully the green where we can begin going back to work. Could you speak to the challenge then, since we're looking at a comp plan that's going to encompass the next 10 years, that we need to, how do we balance this front-end impact on post-COVID and also plan for 10 years?
Right. Well, here's what I would say is we left a world we will never return to. So I will bet my career on that. We're not going to return to what we had up until 3 months ago. The retail environment in particular will not return. The number of restaurants will not return. Those things are permanently lost. So zoning needs to reflect that. I think housing will also change gradually, continue to change gradually. And this is all under the assumption that we will be in a high unemployment environment for some time to come. And just for point of reference, so everybody understands this, because there's at least for some economists, and very few, by the way, who think this might be a V-shaped recovery. In other words, sharp decline, sharp recovery. That's not happening. To give you context, the Great Recession, we reached a high of 10%, maybe close to 11% unemployment at its height, okay? Economists know that basically for every percentage point, in unemployment, it takes about a year to shave that point off, okay? So you think about that. It took, where we got to leading up to this, where we were down to 3.5%, 4% unemployment, It took close to a decade to get there. All right. We are unofficially close to 20% unemployment, right? Officially somewhere in the 15% range. Notwithstanding the latest report, which is already being revised because there was a lot of misclassification for people that are, employed versus unemployed. But realistically, we're closer to 20% unemployment. With that said, we are going to be in a high unemployment environment for years to come, and is likely to be exacerbated by many companies automating jobs further out of existence. So all that says is that the downward pressure on discretionary spending and other activities that would support the type of business environment that we had coming into this, particularly for discretionary items such as eating out, entertainment, that kind of thing. We're not returning to that. And so zoning needs to reflect that. Zoning needs to reflect the fact that we are going to have more e-commerce for, same day delivery, next day delivery, which means a bigger footprint for that. We're going to continue to have, and I failed to mention this, medical office space within the segment of office space is the bright spot and has been. And that's not going to change. And it's not going to change simply because of demographics and because of, we get older, we get less healthy and, ailments and so forth. So that too will continue. And so I think you'll see, some of this retail space being converted to more medical office space, or as affectionately known as doc in a box. So, medical emergency space and other related type of uses. So I guess longer term, what I'm saying is that, and we can talk about this further. I know I'm going to be speaking with David about this, that the long-term outlook is not going to look anything like what we just left. We are now into a new world. It is still evolving. So, we can't necessarily make this concrete, but I can tell you this for certain. It is not going to look anything like what we just left.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions from any board members? How about any from the public? Not seeing any in the chat.
Corey, I think Mike is trying to say something.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike,
I was muted.
you have your mic on?
It's on now. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. This is a very general point. At one of the very early meetings, President Morgan made this suggestion, that the comp plan should include a economic analysis. And we've touched on that on a few meetings, and at the last meeting. And I think I asked the question, would the comp plan indeed include an economic analysis? And what I meant by that was, if we take what David Manhart presented, which is the build out of the township, the way it's described on the hexagon map, an economic analysis would indicate the financial impact, revenues and costs. So that discussion concluded. I think George and/or David said, yeah, we'd like to do that. We intend to do that. I guess my point is, I definitely think it should be done. And what does that take? Do we need to come together as a board and agree, make a motion that it will be done? I just like to try to sort of procedurally finalize that it will be done. And what's required to do that? Does everybody agree? It should be done?
I think way back during the first phase, one of the two things that we heard loud and clear was economic impact and transportation. So that's why we're involving Todd and Scott early in the process. had talked to Todd and I had spoke about how best to incorporate the economic impact and when in our process. And, you know, a typical, and maybe Todd can talk to, you know, how you would do fiscal impact analysis, where in a comp plan it comes in, how that might be incorporated into our comp plan.
Yeah, I think in answer to the question, first of all, it's referred to as a fiscal impact, and fiscal being that we're looking at both the prospective tax and other fee revenues that are generated by development, housing, commercial, industrial, as well as the prospective service costs, municipal, school, inclusive of capital improvements that might be necessary. My advice, and I've certainly worked on a number of these for other municipalities, I've lectured on this topic, is you absolutely want to perform a fiscal impact analysis in advance of finalizing your comp plan, because you want to know, well, if in fact this thing got built out, what does it look like fiscally? You know, are we better off? Are we the same, or are we worse off? Right? And you can't know that until at least you do some projections or analysis to say, okay, here's where we're likely to be given currently known factors such as tax rates and values and so on and so forth, as well as population and number of kids in our school system and the like. So when to do it, it's once you start getting down to a preferred build out or comp plan in terms of what you'd like to see developed, then one of the final things that you're doing is testing that fiscally to say, how does that turn out for us? So that at the very least, let's say it doesn't look good, or it looks like at least some of the land uses might make you net negative. You have an opportunity to tweak, the policy in the comp plan such that when you go to zone for it, you're not adversely impacting yourself from a fiscal standpoint.
So basically be a lot more flexible in the zoning uses.
And that's a great segue into what Todd talked about earlier in the aspect of looking at a form-based zoning code versus a traditional Euclidean code. So what we have now is what's called a Euclidean zoning code. So it separates land uses into separate categories. A form-based code is really about how that area functions and looks. It's not so involved in the actual use of the property. So I think that was a perfect segue into why he was talking about form-based codes.
Correct.
Okay. Everything you've said is aligned with my thoughts. I mean, George and David have kicked off Scott to do the next phase of transportation. Can we leave it to them to work with Todd to do this, or do we need a vote at a BOC meeting? I'm just asking a procedural question.
I think it's already part of the plan, Mike. I think that's what they were referencing. So I'm not really sure if we need to, I don't believe we would need to vote on anything. I think it's understood that whole process will be part of the plan.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and I think it comes into that phase 4. Once we kind of get through our where and our how we're going to grow, what is it going to look like? That's when we have a clearer understanding of how to measure the fiscal impact. So it really can't be started until we get to that through that process. The other thing Todd and I spoke about briefly was looking at the fiscal impact for each of the sections from a utility standpoint. There's fiscal impacts on the utility based on these land use decisions. So incorporating it throughout that next phase is kind of where we're leaning towards. and then probably summarizing at the end. But like Todd had mentioned, the ability to do that fiscal impact prior to finalizing the plan allows us the flexibility to go back in and tweak policy with an understanding of what those impacts are. So I think involving the fiscal impact at that next phase is kind of when we'll start bringing that in more earnest.
That's great.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions or comments from the board?
I have two in the chat, Tori.
All right, let's move right to the chat. George, I'll let you take the lead on who's first.
First one is David Burke. David there?
Dave Burke, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to put my mic on. It
No
would seem
problem.
that there's a direct analogy as the comp plan affects traffic, and we have the traffic study aligned. So does it in the same way affect the fiscal impact, and having that as part of the plan certainly makes a lot of sense. I don't know if Mr. Poole remembers, but at the March meeting, Mike Wolk asked the question about the cost of development, and he quoted a number like $1.25 or something versus the revenue generated. And I think Mr. Poole said that really wasn't true, and he said that I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe you remember the conversation, Mr. Poole, but you said that really isn't true typically, and that typically you can absorb a development without affecting the infrastructure, the schools, and so forth. But during the exercise period, you were walking around, and I showed you the amount of development that's going on in South Whitehall Township and is planned for the next year or two. And you said, well, I guess I could take back my statement because that amount of development may affect or probably affects the fiscal impact, or has a fiscal impact. So I think it's a wise decision that's being made to include the fiscal impact study in the comp plan. I compliment you for that.
Yeah, I do recall that conversation. Thanks for raising it. And that is correct. I mean, in general, or I should say all other things being equal, doesn't necessarily, to build housing, doesn't necessarily mean it's net negative. As a matter of fact, it could be net positive more often than not if you've got capacity in your school system and if your current service delivery, police, fire, sanitation, and the like is, robust and you've got slack or capacity. It's only when you're overwhelming the system with, in this case, a lot of housing that you have to pause and take a look at that and see how much is too much before you agree to that kind of zoning. So yes, that is correct.
Yeah, right now we have about 2,000 housing units on the books for the plan, in our plan. It's being planned.
Right. So, what a fiscal impact analysis would do is say, let's assume it all got built. Let's also look at the bedroom counts of those housing units. Let's look at the current capacity of the school system as well as its projected enrollment. Let's look at your current, police, fire, and so on and so forth, the service delivery, and let's do a what if analysis. Tomorrow that happens, could your systems, in this case, school and municipal, handle it without having to expand, without having to have capital costs? And more importantly, does the building of these housing units, do they pay for themselves? In other words, on net, do they put more into the system than they require in service costs? You can't know that until you do a fiscal impact.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who's next, George?
Lee Salt.
Hey, Lee.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner Morgan. I have something that Mr. Poole said, and just as a discussion point. You talked about fewer retail, fewer restaurants, fewer office space that's going to be rented out. So the question, and we already have in South Whitehall Township, especially Pond Road, a number of offices and space that's available. And you mentioned Kmart, that shopping plaza. One of my thinking behind the new comp plan is we're planning for new building and what's going to come and be built in the future. But what are we going to do with the buildings that are already existing that don't have anybody in them? And I don't know what we can do. And just again, putting some ideas out there. Is there something that when, yes, real estate realtors go and they try to lease these properties and try to find somebody to fill them. But when somebody comes to South Whitehall Township and says, well, I want to build an office space, or I want to build an office building. And as Greg has always told me, it's your property. You can kind of do what you want to as within the means of that property that you own. But is there a way for us as a township to say, listen, there's an office right over here on Pond Road that Aetna used to be in, that maybe we can put you with the landlord or the owner of that building. Maybe you can redevelop that site so we're not taking up more space that is vacant, and reuse what we have before we build new. And I hope there's some way that we can start a discussion about getting that in place, that we can reuse what we have before we start building new things in the future.
Let me comment on that because it's a good point to make. And here's how it works in practice. While the municipality can certainly, do that, they can certainly steer a prospective office user to existing space. And quite honestly, it's going to happen anyway. I mean, that's what brokers are out there to do. And usually a builder of the space is first contacting the brokers to say, what's the inventory like? Is it Class A space, Class B, Class C? And that has also a lot to do with whether or not a prospective user is going to say, yeah, I'll take that building. Is it Class A? Is it in the location that I want? Does it have the features that I want? Fine, great. Well, let's negotiate. If not, they're going to pass it up and obviously opt to build new. Now, let me say this, and this is unfortunately what I didn't get to present because it was in the presentation. You are likely to have, and I know this for a fact because I've represented or worked in other towns where this is the case, where you have a lot of obsolete or obsolescent office space, and it's also in a kind of a business park where you've got a combination of office and flex space, like / light industrial. You are likely to have, over the next few years, the owners of those properties, of the office properties, come in and ask for a zoning variance to allow for the space to be converted for light industrial use, or for the space to be redeveloped for light industrial, because light industrial is going to be, like I said, a hot commodity. Now, the problem is the price differential. The price of an office building versus the price of a light industrial building, the gap is pretty far. However, once office space the value of it continues to drop and that gap narrows, all of a sudden it becomes, more advantageous or attractive for the owner to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and convert this for light industrial, in which case they're going to look for that zoning change. So I think that's probably what is likely to happen in those instances.
And Lee, if I could add to that, I have to say that there is always a push from many different levels, whether it be through, the chamber or some other organization. As businesses move around, they always, reuse is always looked at first and always promoted. And, we've had some wonderful reuse opportunities right here in this township. You look at, West End Racquetball. They've done some amazing things with that. So that is always something we look at very closely first and want to see happen, because that makes the most sense for sure. But it's a very good point. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions from the public? All
Mr. Moore, one
right.
more question.
Todd.
One more, sorry.
Oh,
Oh.
sure.
One more thing.
Sure.
And this is, I guess, towards David and George. Have we incorporated any agri-hoods in our in the planning at all?
So when you say you're talking about agricultural, like agricultural designations?
Yes. Well, like agricultural around, you know, there's homes with agricultural mixed within that.
Yeah. So I mean, the current zoning code has not so much direct designations, but they have designations that deal with agricultural activities. We've actually been talking, myself, Greg, and Dave, about how we can make that even more of a priority in areas where people want to see that type of land use. So we've been talking about incentive type of opportunities. This is really beyond the comp plan. I mean, the comp plan would set the policy, say these are agricultural areas. But what we would do as the next step in the zoning code then is maybe say, are there ways that we can look at, I think we talked about it for conservation subdivision design, or other opportunities where we're looking at congregating agricultural lands in most appropriate places and with most appropriate soils and so forth. And we've also obviously been talking with the Lehigh County groups and other groups that deal in that type of thing, agricultural preservation. And I know as a commission, it's being discussed now. So that's all kind of coming together. But hopefully, what the comp plan would do is say, these are the areas that we anticipate that we want to keep and retain as agricultural. Then how do we structure the zoning to make sure we incentivize that happens? I don't know if that answers your question, but it's there's nothing really distinct or different that we do now than any other community does. But hopefully we will, through this process, develop some unique concepts and ideas to make sure that we are preserving those most appropriate areas.
Yeah, I was kind of talking. I mean, I know where you're coming from. I was kind of talking a little more about like housing and agriculture in the same development type thing.
Yeah, so that would be the conservation subdivision design concept. So what it does is it basically, what that concept in theory basically has you cluster your residential component in a certain portion of the tract, which leaves the balance of the tract able to be, with the opportunity to continue to be cultivated. And then, you strategically look at adjacent properties to make sure then that you are bringing those properties and continue to aggregate that rural village, whatever that concept is for that residential cluster, and keep those tracts contiguous and where they would make sense for potentially preservation or whatever the case might be, or just outright utilization. So there are other concepts out there, but those are mostly zoning strategies, and so that they're a little farther down the road. But what the comp plan will hopefully do is, as our land use groups get more active and involved down the pipe after we get through this next phase, those are the kinds of things that would come out of that, along with how that would look through that scenario opportunity that Dave presented earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, if I may, we've been going through a transition. You're probably aware that back before the 2009 comp plan, our zoning ordinance was pretty much set up for old school agriculture, big farm fields, the farmhouses here and there, and that's what it was set up for. We've been transitioning since the last comp plan into something that's more inclusive, more mixed use. Right now, our zoning ordinance does have a lot averaging section in there, which does allow for a type of conservation development right now. We're obviously going to be expanding that. And we've been looking at more specialized farming instead of large 40-acre, 100-acre, 200-acre tracts, 5 acres or less, where you can get a really specialized land use going, which is currently not permitted, but we're looking to add that in as well. So we've been in transition from a more traditional farming use to the newer types of agriculture and agribusiness, and as you said, agrihoods. So we're in process.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks. All right. Any other questions from the public? Okay,
Morgan,
I want to, yes, Commissioner
I'm
Kelly.
sorry. I thought of a question while the public was speaking. Todd, when you were talking earlier about fiscal impact study on schools and resources. One thing that we haven't talked about tonight, which is something as a region that we're dealing with, is sewer capacity, and is, I'm not sure if you're the one to answer this question or not, but as we're looking at growth, that's something that we need to factor in. Or maybe at what point are we going to utilize that also as we're looking with what the fiscal impact is of development?
That would be made part and parcel. In other words, looking at the number of housing units and commercial space prospectively developed, we would have to have a conversation with your utilities to say, okay, here's what prospectively could happen. They would do a simple calculation and let us know, you would have enough capacity or you wouldn't. And here would be the implications of, having to accommodate in terms of expanding that infrastructure and the associated costs.
And so to kind of chime in on that just a little bit, from a sewer capacity standpoint, currently we have so much sewer capacity and we've used X and we have Y left. So, certain, like, I think that was Todd talking, all of that would be taken into consideration with any build out throughout the township or further development. And then also the consideration would be considered if you had to build or were willing to build increased lines, what is the impact of that? Is there a place to take that water or get that water from, or take that wastewater to? So yeah, you would have to consider all of that in the fiscal impact of the whole comprehensive plan. Any other thoughts or comments? Diane, does that answer your question, or?
It does. Thank you, Todd.
This is
Okay.
Mike. This is Mike. I just have a quick point for George and David and Scott and Todd. Thank you for pulling this together. We're at a key milestone. We're about midpoint probably in the overall process. Seems like, to use the cliche, we got enough information where the rubber's meeting the road and move forward with the transportation work and the economic study and all the sub-teams. So thank you for enabling us to reach this milestone and for pulling together these presentations. I believe they were the right level of information that we need at this point in time. So thanks very much.
Okay.
Welcome.
All right. Just to mirror that, Dave, George, Greg, Scott, and Todd, great job. Thank you for pulling this together. Like Commissioner Walk had mentioned, maybe what we could do, backfeed.
Terrible feedback coming in.
Yeah, terrible feedback. Yeah, great. Thank you. So maybe what we could do for some of these presentations is make sure that we get them posted, which I'm sure you guys are already on top of that. So that would be awesome. I think there's especially some of these land use impacts post-COVID. Todd will really be looking forward to seeing that in color, like you had mentioned. That's super exciting. Just to kind of get some feel of where we're going. So again, thank you. Great presentation. We look forward to the next part.
And just
Dave, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just The blog is where we post comp plan stuff. So the presentation will be on there. Check back for the story map. So everything gets kind of released through that blog. And the address is on this slide at the lower right-hand corner. swtcompplan.org. It's got 2 P's. It took me a while to figure that out, but I set it up with 2 P's.
So Dave, is our next step here, if I understand correctly, the how is we're looking to kind of have another meetings or discussions or maybe some more public information in later in the summer, beginning of September, or will we be meeting again prior to that?
Yeah, so we'll figure out how best to roll them out. Whether we do it as like a public meeting or just set up like online survey. We're kind of trying to figure it out.
All right, keep us posted, Dave. Thank you.
Will do.
All right. Okay. Now it is the part of the meeting where we have courtesy of the floor. It's the opportunity for anybody who's present this evening to bring up any non-agenda item. We have a lot of feedback. Is there something with the mic system that's happening? All right. Is there anybody in the public that has a wants courtesy of the floor this evening? George, I'm not seeing anything in the chat unless you're seeing something.
I do have one. It looks like David Burke just shot.
Mr. Burke.
Yes, just one comment. I think it was an excellent meeting, and I want to thank the traffic as well as Mr. Poole for their input. I think it was very, very invaluable and easy to understand, and it was just a great meeting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Great stuff. Great stuff. All right. Anything else? I'm not seeing any other comments come through. All right. We have no executive session planned for this evening, so I do need a motion for adjournment. Do I hear said motion? So moved. Got a motion from Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Anybody? I'm not really sure who made that.
Bill McNair.
Second from?
Bill
Second
McNair.
from Mr. McNair. Thank you so much. All in favor, say aye. We're not going to do an entire roll call vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any nays? No nays. The ayes have it. Thank you, Planning Board, very much for joining us this evening, and we're moving along forward great. So looking forward to more great things. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.